The program starts in 5 minutes. Program starts in 2 minutes. This program starts in 1 minute. This program starts now.
Hello everyone, this is Revati and welcome to the 10th edition of Hyderabad Runners Weekly Webinar Series Beyond the Track. At the outset, we thank you for attending and viewing our Yoga Day celebrations events last weekend. Hyderabad Runners, since its inception, has made its mission to create active lifestyles and make running as the preferred form of fitness activity through its mentors and ambassadors across and outside Hyderabad, through our Couch to 5K, Club Run, Outdoors Kids, Train and Shine Fitness, and our signature AHM program. Times are changing. With most of the countries unlocking their economies, the new normal is very quickly taking shape. And it looks like learning to live alongside the COVID-19 virus is one of the criteria we have to accept now. As we are starting to get back to some sense of normalcy in our lives, it's much more essential that we continue to be more cautious to keep ourselves and our families healthy and safe by following all the hygiene and distancing guidelines given by the governments. We at Hyderabad Runners wish you all a long and healthy life ahead. As part of our initiatives to keep you constantly aware, educated, and motivated in these uncertain and turbulent times, we bring you Beyond the Track, a live webinar series of conversations with some of the highly distinguished experts from the running and related sports fields to help you all equip yourself with both knowledge as well as practical training. In this 10th edition of Beyond the Track, we are honored to connect you to the triathlete, coach, and author Scott Murr, who is also the director of the Human Performance Lab at the Performand University. Request you all to be patient in case of any network issues. We'll do our best to make this a smooth learning experience for you all. Also, we have some questions you already sent us to ask a speaker. Request others to post the questions in the comment section of this video and we will get them answered to the best of our ability. Without further ado, I'd like to invite Mr. Lakshmi Narayan Bangat to introduce and welcome our speaker for today. Over to you, Bangat, sir.
Thank you, Revati. Friends, today's speaker is sports scientist whose research focuses on assessment and analysis of human performance and how aging impacts lifelong running. It's indeed an honor to introduce Dr. Scott Murr, who is an assistant professor in the Health Sciences Department at Performand University and co-author of Runner's World Run, Less Run Faster, as well as Runner's World Train Smart, Run Forever. He has joined the Performand faculty in 1998. Prior to teaching at Performand, Dr. Murr taught at the University of Georgia and at Anderson University. In addition to teaching at Performand, Dr. Murr is the director of the Human Performance Lab at Performand University and is co-founder of the Performand Institute of Running and Scientific Training. What's more amazing is the fact that Dr. Murr is the 30-plus year veteran in the sports of triathlon and has been running marathons even longer. From marathons to cycling, centuries to triathlons, Dr. Murr has completed in over 300 endurance events. Can you believe it? Having completed in Ironman Europe, Ironman Canada, Ironman USA, and the Ironman Triathlon World Championship in Kona, Hawaii, Dr. Murr is the 12-time Ironman Triathlon finisher. Dr. Murr is the advisor to the Performand Triathlon Club and a contributing writer for Pace Magazine, the local running and fitness magazine. Without further ado, I now request Dr. Murr to start his session. Over to you, Dr. Murr.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate this opportunity to join everybody. I have been part of the local Greenville Running Club for 30 years, and that really is a wealth of information, and I certainly applaud all of you as members of the local club there in Hyderabad as well. So I really think that is a great opportunity for you to improve your running, stay connected, stay healthy. And so I always love the opportunity to talk to others about running, about training, about triathlon. And so I'm really thankful for the opportunity this evening to share with you some of the experiences that I've had, some of the things that I've learned, some of the things that I've been able to do to help others. And so what I was hoping to do this evening was talk a little bit about running, talk a little bit about what I've done with my running, talk about how I transitioned to multi-sport, how I've been able to apply my career with my passion of exercise and how I've been able to share that with others. And then maybe some of the lessons that I've learned and how I've been able to share that and help others as they pursue an active, healthy lifestyle. And so that's kind of what I was hoping to do today. I actually started running in 1976. I was 15 years old. My dad started running. And although I didn't start running until 1976, I didn't do my first road race until 1981. It was a 10K. My goal was to break 40 minutes, and I just barely slid under that time back in 1981. I was in college. I did a couple half marathons. Did my first marathon in 1982. I was an active person most of my adult life, teenage years. And so 1984, I had a faculty member challenge me to do a triathlon. I had no idea what one was. And I knew how to swim. I rode a bike regularly, and I had done some running races. And so I ended up doing my first triathlon in June of 1984. And it was just so fun, and I just loved it so much that I have continued and have stuck with it ever since. In fact, like most of us, as you do a little bit, you want to do some more. So I ended up doing my first Ironman distance race in 1988. So gosh, 30 years ago. It's hard to imagine. But I still love this stuff, still participate. And so wanted to maybe share some of my experiences and some of the things that I've done. Obviously, having been doing this for such a long time, I've done all sorts of races. You can see that 20 years ago, 25 years ago, my times weren't bad. I was 5K under 17 minutes, 10K under right at 33 minutes. But it's kind of interesting. I started running again when I was 15. I did my first races when I was 18, 19. And you can see that I didn't get to my fastest times until 10, 12, 15 years later. So I think what this illustrates is that it actually takes some time to become proficient and efficient at running and multi-sport. And so I think one of the things that becomes really challenging and really difficult to get across to people is that you've got an opportunity to improve. However, those improvements do not come overnight. And so staying consistent, staying focused, having a plan is certainly key to getting faster. And again, it's not going to occur overnight. Kind of interesting, I think most runners tend to focus on the marathon, but for my races, 5K, 10K, half marathon, and marathon, really, I'm going to turn the light on here. My 10K performance of these four, my fastest times, is my highest performance race. And so while everybody focuses on the marathon, everybody might not be the race for everybody. So I think it's important that people participate in a variety of different distances and maybe identify, hey, I'm a much better 5K, 10K runner than I am a half marathon or marathon runner, which is fine. I think that sometimes there's too much of a focus on a marathon, but I still do all of these races. But you can also see that my fastest times are behind me. I still run. I still like to think of myself as a competitor. I still like to train and go hard, but aging is inevitable and slowing down is inevitable. We're getting slower. I'm not trying to slow down. I feel like I'm running just as hard as I did when I was 20 and 30 and 40, but my times are slower. And that is one of the things that becomes very difficult to get people, athletes, competitors to acknowledge and embrace that it simply is inevitable that we're going to get slower. That doesn't mean we can't still give it a good go and be competitive and have fun and it be just as exhilarating. It is for me. But you can see that over the past 20, 25 years, I have gotten slower. One of those reasons, and I'm certainly not going to blame my family, is my family. My family is my top priority. I have a 20-year-old son. He played soccer in high school. He continues to run. I have a daughter who is a rising senior in high school. She plays soccer. She runs some last July. She and I did a running race and we decided to have fun, wear some costumes. And then of course, I have a family, my wife and I. Kind of an interesting story here. I was engaged for 12 hours. I proposed to my wife at the beginning of Ironman Canada, did the swim, the bike, the run, crossed the finish line, and at the finish line of Ironman Canada, got married. So my wife understands my interest, my passion, and this has been part of our lifestyle for 30 years. And then of course, like so many of us, I've got a mother who's 84. She is blind. She lives 3 hours away. And during this COVID time, I am unable to visit her. But so my family is my top priority. And so while I am very energetic and passionate about wanting to stay fit and run hard and race, likewise, my family comes first. And I, luckily, so far, have been able to find a balance between my interest and my family. In fact, we're a pretty tight fit on these things that we do. It works out pretty well. My day, luckily, is very similar to what some of my personal interests are. I teach at Performand University in our health sciences department, and I am constantly working with our college students, 19, 20-year-old college students. And we are in a human performance lab where I am teaching students how to do EKGs. I am teaching students how to administer VO2 tests. I am teaching students how to interpret the data from a VO2 test. And we're very fortunate that we've got a well-equipped lab. We have tested high performance Olympic caliber runners. We have tested Olympic caliber, well, Tour de France cyclists in our lab, and we've had our students do these things. So really kind of fun for me and fun for our students. And it's been I've been very lucky that I've been able to combine my professional career with some personal interests. And I think that's one of the advantages that I've had by understanding the science, being involved in the science. I've been able to apply that to my own training and the coaching that I've done to help others. I'm still doing this. Yes, it's been a long time. Yeah, I went back and actually counted them up, and that's crazy. So yeah, 48 marathons, over 200 multi-sport events. I've done that. I did most of my Ironman events before I had children. So very fortunate there. And I continue to do this. I am hoping to continue. I'm relatively healthy. So this is still part of my lifestyle, still part of my career, still part of my profession. And I plan on continuing. I enjoy being outside. I enjoy challenging myself, seeing what I can squeeze out of my abilities. But I'm also looking for new and unique challenges. And so yes, I'll still hopefully run a marathon this year. Who knows with this COVID-19, whether that'll be an opportunity or not. But whether it's a cycling event, whether it's an off-road triathlon, I am always looking for opportunities to be outside, be active, challenge myself, and try to find ways to squeeze the most that I can out of myself, even at my current age. Having been doing this for so long, I have seen an awful lot of changes. When I first started running, it was running shorts, running shoes, and a pretty basic watch. My first triathlon, first several years of triathlons, there were no such thing as wetsuits. I did my first triathlon on a 35-pound bike. I actually saw aero bars for the first time in 1987. And luckily I was able to get a pair of these aero bars for my first Ironman in 1988. So over the past 35 years, the technology has really changed. But some things have stayed the same. And while a lot of athletes really want to focus on the technology and the equipment, ultimately it's the training, and training smart and training with a purpose. It's kind of interesting, the triathlon that I did last summer, I'm on a $1,000 bike, and I am passing people on $5,000 bikes. And so again, while people like to focus on the equipment, I think sometimes people are misguided on where they put their focus, and you don't have to have all this fancy equipment. You can be competitive, pretty basic, if you follow some of the basic guidelines of training with a purpose. But also, while we like to train and go hard, it's important that we recover. I like to tell the folks that I work with that your workout is not done until you have recovered from that workout. Kind of interesting, there have been some studies lately that have shown that people training for marathons and people training for triathlons have actually gained weight. Folks tend to think that because they're doing this training, that's a free pass to eat whatever they would like. And that's simply not the case. It's important that nutrition is something that we consciously think about, and think about that just as much as we plan our training sessions. One of the things that I think that's been very fortunate for me is by getting involved in multi-sport pretty early, that actually had me doing a variety of different things. And that's one of the things that I think is oftentimes missing in a lot of runners, is that they simply want to run. And one of the things that I try to do with the runners that I help is trying to get them to diversify their training, not just always focus on long distance runs, not always running the same pace, but running different distances, different paces, even doing different types of exercise, from swimming to cycling. So I think diversifying and having variety in your training can be a key component to getting the best out of your workouts as well. And having a plan is certainly important, but life interrupts, whether it's COVID-19, whether it's a family member, whether it's your personal, you get sick, come down with a cold, travel. So while having a plan is important, we've also got to have some flexibility. And so these principles have remained the same for the past 30 years, 40 years of my training and racing, but even longer than that. And I think these concepts are ones that need to be the base of anybody's training program, whether that's running or that is multi-sport. Without a doubt, there are some, what I like to call, pillars that are paramount to understanding performance. And there are a variety of different performance factors. most of which can be measured. And that's what I get to do as my job and as the director of our lab, is measure these performance factors to help athletes understand where they can improve. And so you've all heard of VO2 max, measuring that can be very insightful. Measuring body composition. Too many runners base their health on their body weight, but ultimately it's not so much your body weight as it is what your body is comprised of. So body composition is pretty important. We work with a lot of runners that are really surprised that when we measure their body composition and we tell them what their percent body fat is, they are really shocked. And so standing on a weight scale isn't always going to give you some insight on that. Monitoring nutrition, of course, I just alluded to, is awfully important in that regards. It's not just eat whatever you like just because you exercise a lot. You've all heard of lactate threshold. That's one that typically needs to be measured in a lab. And that is one I think is probably overlooked by so many coaches and athletes. And again, we have the luxury of being able to test athletes and determine their lactate threshold and measure that. So understanding these pillars of performance really is pretty important as you try to put together an effective training plan. When it comes to training, there are some things that are awfully important to consider. And one of those is specificity. We get this question a lot about, do I need to do hill running? Well, if you're going to be doing a race that is a hilly event, then yes, you do. But if you are running a race that is a flat course, then you might not need to be doing specific hill training. So mimicking what you're going to do on race day with your training is terribly important. When you make adaptations, and we all have that ability to adapt to the stress of exercise, but how long does that take? I just indicated that I did my first running races in the early 80s, but I wasn't running my fastest times until 10, 15 years later. So it takes time to make these adaptations. And while we oftentimes like to get on 16-week training programs or 12-week training programs, and while we can improve during that time period, that is not going to necessarily get us to our best performance. And so I think sometimes we need to think a little bit longer term. In fact, when I did my first triathlon in 1984, then I did my first Ironman in 1988, my goal was to actually do the race in Kona before I turned 30. And I was able to accomplish that goal, but that was 3 years later. So it took me 3 years from my first Ironman distance race before I actually accomplished my goal of doing that world championship event in Kona. So without a doubt, maturity is something that we have to factor in. Now, a lot of that's kind of an interesting dynamic as to when you start running. Of course, I started running as a teenager. A lot of folks don't pick up running until they're in their 30s or 40s or their midlife crisis and they've gained some weight. And so one of my running buddies, he didn't start running until he was 45. So he is still making some improvements in his running, even though he's now 50. And so we all have that ability. Now, of course, aging is something that we are all fighting, or most of us, depending on your age, I suppose. And so individual differences. So my training buddy who's 50, he gets really frustrated that I'm older than he is, but I'm able to outperform him. Now, we are all different. I've been doing this for a much longer time period than he has, and we're just different individuals. And so when it comes to training and running with others and racing with others, it really is individualized. And while these principles apply to everybody, we've got to keep in mind that we are all different. And so, let's see, why did that not go? We are all interested in peak performance, right? But finding that key to peak performance really becomes an individual challenge. We have got to make sure that we don't overdo it and burn out. And too many people these days are really interested in getting there now. And they don't always factor in all of the things that are necessary. Stress is cumulative. So from our work to COVID-19 worries to temperature, we have got to factor that in so that we can avoid this fatigue and that we can keep it on the quality side of training. Training with a purpose becomes crucial. Intensity really is the biggest factor. So many runners like to focus on how often they run or how long they run or how far they run. And those are terribly important variables, but intensity factors in that as well. And so, and even the mode of exercise, again, I've alluded to, it doesn't need to always be running. And then the key part is, I've actually enjoyed the 9 webinars that have occurred so far with the Hyderabad Running Group. I think they've been a very diverse group. It would be neat to actually have a sports psychologist to talk about the staying positive and staying focused during this COVID-19 period. That's very difficult. So many of us are having to do all of our training by ourselves, and that's hard. And it's hard to stay focused. It's hard to stay focused when you don't have a goal. Right now, it's, at least here in the US, there are very few races on the calendar in October and November because who knows whether we'll be able to do those. Without a goal, that makes it hard to stay focused. So trying to stay on this side of the training curve becomes paramount, and avoiding slipping over to the fatigue side really does become an interesting balance that we all have to tiptoe through. One of the biggest things that I struggle with, or I struggle to get across to others, is that we all want to improve. But each of us has some component of our fitness that is probably pretty good. And all of us probably have some component of our fitness that has room for improvement. And so while there are plenty of training programs online and in magazines, some printed program is not always going to be optimal for a group of 10. You could apply that one training program to 10 people, and some might improve a lot, some might improve a little, some might actually step backwards with their fitness because it's too much or not enough. So just a reminder that really we are all an experiment of one, and we all have got to figure out where we are and what works best for us as an individual. So saying that, there are an awful lot of factors that contribute to your endurance performance. And the research is really clear, and it's pretty complex. And we're certainly not going to spend a lot of time talking about these various performance variables. But I would like to remind everybody that there are 3, and this is agreed upon in the scientific research, that VO2 max, without a doubt, how big your engine is an important factor. Most runners, most endurance athletes like to think about VO2 max more than any of them, but I'm actually not certain that is the key variable. I actually tend to think that lactate threshold, lactate tolerance is probably the key variable to performance. But then likewise is movement economy or running economy or movement efficiency. And that's where doing drills becomes important. Now, if we were talking cycling, we would still highlight these same three. We would probably also, if we were talking cycling, highlight resistance to movement. If we were talking swimming, we would highlight these same three, but we would also focus on movement economy. Swimming is so skill oriented, but we would also focus on resistance to movement. Water is very dense. So this model of factors that influence performance are crucial. And this model would highlight different components depending on what sport you might be doing. But this model does apply to almost all endurance activities. So consequently, taking that model and thinking about how can I squeeze out the best that I can for my performance, without a doubt, your aerobic capacity, your VO2 max. Are you doing the right type of training to improve that? There are certain type of workouts that will improve that. And there's some workouts that you do that might not impact your VO2 max, and that's fine. Some of those workouts, tempo runs, for example, threshold runs, can raise your lactate threshold. Likewise, on a bike, you can do bike workouts that will raise your lactate threshold. Also, running speed, leg turnover. So we have all got to practice faster speed. I'll give you a quick example. My daughter hopes to run cross country this fall for her school. This will be her 4th year. And right now, all of her teammates are out running at an 8-minute pace. But they hope to be racing at a 6:30 pace. And I'm trying to get my daughter to realize that it's not all about going out and running slow 5 days a week. Because if you train yourself to run slow, you're going to be very good at running slow. And so you've got to have some workouts that are designed specifically to help with leg turnover. And then we all know the importance of doing drills to improve our form and our movement economy. Most runners like to simply run, and most adult runners, at least those that I work with, don't spend enough time with doing drills to improve their running economy. But I think that becomes terribly important, especially as we age. So when it comes to training, what we have learned in our lab is that it is important to have a plan. To simply just go out and run might be fun, might help maintain your body weight, but if you actually are interested in pursuing a goal, you probably need to have some sort of plan. And it needs to be an effective one that addresses what you're training for, what your physiological weaknesses are, and again, as I alluded to earlier, actually favors quality, not just volume, but quality. The research is very clear that intensity is the bigger key rather than volume. So ultimately, we want to come up with a way to get faster. Most of us who are probably here today are interested in seeing, can I get to the finish line a little bit quicker? So I wanted to give you an example. A year or so ago, I received an email from a physician in New Mexico, the other side of the country, 47 years old. And he had this goal of running sub 3 hours. And he had attempted that previously, had failed. He had a running coach who had been an elite runner. And this elite running coach had this 47-year-old doctor overdoing it. And this guy was getting injured. And so he contacted me asking for help with his goal. So his goal was to run sub 3 for the marathon. And so 47-year-old guy, yep, you can see his height and weight, even his percent body fat. So this is you would look at this and think, all right, this guy is got a runner's build. He should be able to do this. We were able to actually bring him into the lab from New Mexico and actually test him. And look at his VO2 max, look at his running speed, see what his heart rate was, measure his lactate threshold. And so we were able to see physiologically where was he at. And looking at this data, certainly looked to me that he had the physiological capacity to run sub 3. So what I did was I had him run less. So I said, look, I'm not going to have you exercise less. We're just going to shift your running around. But what we need first is that you are able to run pain-free, injury-free. So I want you to spend a couple months basically cutting down your running. Let's get you healthy. If we're going to do some quality running, you're going to have to be healthy. Then I'm going to inch you up to a 12-mile run, 19, 20 kilometers in the month of November. In December, we'll bump that up a little further to 24 kilometers. Then what we'll do is we're going to do a 16-week training program. And then we're going to have you run. He had qualified for Boston, and he had this goal to go sub 3 at Boston. Made sure that he was getting in his drills. I said, look, this is crucial that you include this as part of your training. We're going to get you a little faster on your tempo runs. We're going to make your tempo runs a little bit further. We're going to increase the distance on those. Strength training, you're 47 years old. We have got to make sure that you've got the musculature to hold up to this mileage that you're going to be doing and that last 10K of that marathon. And of course, range of motion. So to keep you flexible, I want you stretching every day. So we gave this guy plenty of time. Didn't want to rush this. So we started in September. We're getting through the end of that year, keeping him healthy, bumping it up gradually, his running. And then in the new year, January through April, we are very focused on what we were doing. So he goes to Boston in April, runs a 2:57, beats his goal by 3 minutes. He actually texted me about 10 minutes after he crossed the finish line and said, the strategy worked. I can't thank you enough. You're a genius. I'm not a genius, but I understand running and I understand the science behind running. And by being smart and applying a smart approach, an effective approach to your training, I do think it's possible to accomplish some of these ambitious goals that so many of us have. So from my experiences, from working in the lab, from coaching others, what have I learned? Well, runners, we all like to have our goal. That keep us focused, that keep us getting out the door. Sadly, unfortunately, most of us want to accomplish these goals now, and trying to get runners to have some patience, to exercise some patience is a real challenge. Most runners want to run a marathon. And then of course, once you've run a marathon, you then want to qualify for Boston, right? Most of us like to appreciate and value the things that we've done. And so many of us find an identity in those things that we do. I don't typically call myself a runner. I don't typically call myself a triathlete, but that's how we typically refer to ourselves. And that's fine, right? I know that runners oftentimes pursue conflicting goals. I want to run a PR in the 5K this weekend, and I want to run a PR in my marathon in 2 months. Well, I'm not sure those two go together. Which one do you want to focus on? Let's focus on one. But to do every local running race and run a PR or PB every time simply is not realistic. If we are going to be on the edge of quality training and burnout, fatigue, and injury, we have got to be super cautious, right? We get comfortable with being uncomfortable when we go out and do these high quality, intense workouts, but we cannot ignore the signs and symptoms that we get from our body. We have got to listen to our body. I would much rather cut back today, miss today, so that I can train next week, rather than push my luck today, get injured, and then have to miss a week. So it's important that we don't ignore those telltale signs our leg or our hip might be giving us. Again, I think variety is the key. And so I think trying to get runners to do other exercise other than just running really can be beneficial. That's what our research in our lab has shown, that by cross-training consistently and effectively with your running can actually improve your running. And we really do, it would be nice to sometimes get some feedback from a knowledgeable person who can be a little unbiased to say, does this make sense or not? So having a coach is probably a good idea. And I would imagine that there are plenty of coaches and knowledgeable resources there at Hyderabad where you can find somebody to assist with that. I have also learned that most runners don't think about pacing enough and don't focus on their pace. They look at their watch too much, but it's the internal pace that I think we need to think about. Most runners want to spend their time running, but if you want to be a lifelong runner, if you want to be a strong, fit runner, it's crucial to include the strength training. Too many runners neglect that component of their exercise program. Maintaining good range of motion is something that is crucial to staying fast, that leg turnover, and avoiding injury. And again, doing some drill work to make sure that your posture and your form is good. And that's something we need to think about daily. I ran earlier today, and I spent half of my run thinking about, what is my foot plant like? How's my back feel? Am I upright? Am I getting tired? Is that affecting my form? So we've got to be mindful of that as well. And then, of course, having extra fat body weight certainly is not going to help our efforts running down the road. So what we've done here at Performand and the research that we've done is we are saying, all right, we're going to have 3 high quality runs. And on those other days, we're going to do some cross training, right? So what I like to suggest to runners is that let's do all distances. Let's be very gradual with our mileage increases. Let's stay consistent on this. Let's get in our drills. Let's get in our strength training. Listen to your body and be smart. And if you listen to your body and not focus on what your watch is saying, I think that's probably a sound approach. The past 4 marathons that I've run, I have run without a watch. Now, of course, I've been doing this for a long time, so I know my body and I know what my body's capable of. So I don't need a watch. I mean, what am I going to do if I look at my watch and it says I'm behind schedule? Am I going to pick it up? No. What am I going to do if I'm ahead of schedule? Am I going to slow down? Well, I'm going to do a body check and see. So I think learning and knowing your body becomes crucial. And if you have to take a rest day, I mean, I cannot do at 58 what I could do when I was 38. So I have certainly got to take more rest now than I did 20 years ago. So consequently, the approach that I have applied with my running is that I'm actually getting in some swimming and some cycling to mix in with my running. Now, because we have promoted this approach, a lot of runners natural transition to multi-sport, right? And so I think by including the swimming and the cycling, we're getting some total body fitness. We are reducing our risk of injury. The variety can actually help keep us motivated, and I actually think can give you some confidence with this sort of stuff. So if you think, all right, I've done a 5K, I've done a 10K, I've done a half marathon, I've done a marathon. I want to do multi-sport stuff. Well, I think that becomes kind of an interesting dynamic. How do you do that? So a 5K, you're talking 20, 30, 40 minutes of exercise. 10K, 40 minutes to an hour. If you've done a marathon, you've been out there exercising 3 to 4 hours. You are not ready for an Ironman, but doing a sprint triathlon, sure, that makes sense. You're talking an hour and a half, 2 hours of exercise. An Olympic distance event, you're talking 3 to 4 hours of exercise. So if you've done a marathon, an Olympic triathlon makes a lot of sense. The exercise time is the same. Maybe even thinking about a half iron, 70.3 is how they're oftentimes referred to. But boy, that is a long day to be out there exercising, 6, 7 hours. But to think about an Ironman, wow, you're talking 12 plus hours of nonstop exercise. So we have definitely got to be a little smart on how we think about doing that sort of thing. So if you look at triathlons, I tend to like to think that you've got to think about your race distances and then what your weekly training would be like. So if you're talking about an Olympic distance triathlon, you're probably going to swim 4 to 5 kilometers a week. You're probably going to bike 60 miles, 100 kilometers. So I think as we improve our running fitness, we get a little bit more fit, we want to think about the multi-sport stuff. We need to make the jump a reasonable jump in terms of duration. And of course, we've all got to balance this with our time. We've got families, we've got jobs. And so is it possible to get in the training in order to be smart, get to the finish line without compromising your health? So for those who are interested in a multi-sport approach, yeah, doing some interval type swim workouts, some interval type cycling workouts work well with doing the same with your running. Likewise, you do tempo runs, you should do a tempo swim. You can do a tempo bike ride. You can do a long ride. You can do a long run, and figuring that out. Now, in this particular approach, this has you exercising 7 days a week. And of course, you've got to be smart. You've got to listen to your body. You've got to get in some quality rest. I am not certain that any one of these workouts is crucial. You miss one week, that's fine. You miss a different one next week, that's fine. Consistency is the key. There is not one single workout here that is the key to being a successful runner or the key to being a successful triathlete. So again, consistency over months is really the key to getting to the finish line of a multi-sport event. So for triathletes, I like to suggest, look, we are all different, our skill level with swimming. So I think getting a coach certainly is the key for people who want to transition from runner to multi-sport. Again, I think getting the training in needs to be the focus rather than spending your dollars on the equipment. You've got to have a bike, but it doesn't have to be anything fancy. Most runners want to maintain their running and now add extra stuff. Well, actually, when I started doing this in the 80s, I cut back my running and I added my swimming. That was my worst. So I tried to get better at that. And even though I cut back my running and focused on my swimming, I didn't lose time in my local run race performances. So it's okay to cut back on your running, and that's where your strength is, to focus on your cycling or your swimming or wherever your weakness might be. And again, it's all about making them high quality workouts as opposed to doing more and more and more. Practicing transitions, I actually like to look at triathlon as 5 events, not 3. There's the swim. There's the swim to bike transition. Most people don't even practice that. The bike transition to the bike to run transition. Most people don't practice that. And then the run. So I like to think about 5 events, not just 3. You've got to know how to fix your bike if you're out on the road and you have a flat or something, a mechanical issue. So learning the bike maintenance is important. Most runners, when they get on a bike, like to put it in a big gear and push hard. But if you want to maintain your running and not wreck your legs, having a fast turnover, high cadence is definitely the way for runners turning triathletes. I would recommend. I didn't get the opportunity to do this when I first started out, but if you have an opportunity for open water swimming, that certainly is a huge advantage. Depending on what distance you're going to be out there doing, you've got to train your stomach to be able to handle the fluid and the nutrition that you might be taking. Sprint triathlon, not so much important. But if you're doing a half iron distance event where you're out there for 5, 6, 7 hours, you're going to be putting in calories, and you've got to train your stomach to be able to handle that. And then, of course, if you want to do all this, you've got to factor in that strength training. So it gets a little bit more complex to be a multi-sport athlete. We've got to be flexible with our training and our racing. We oftentimes like to project on what we're going to do, but you can only do what's in the moment. You can't think about 5 hours down the road or 2 hours down the road. It's like, what can I do now? Relax, watch my breathing. Don't worry about that competitor that just passed me. Kind of interesting, I've had some great races on days that I felt horrible. Get to the start line, I just don't feel good, but I still get out there and go. And I've actually been able to squeeze out some good performances. Yes, it would have been nice if I felt good, but you don't have to feel good to have a good race, right? Knowing yourselves, your pace, the rate at which you consume calories, take in water is important. And we're all different on that regards. This is kind of weird. I've done 12 Ironman races. You're not going to believe me, but in the 12 races I've done, I've never had a negative thought. I have always focused on where I'm at now, what I can do, how much fun I'm enjoying doing this, and trying to challenge myself as opposed to getting negative. Yeah, there are times. Last time I did Ironman in Hawaii, I ended up swallowing way too much salt water in the swim, messed up my stomach. I wasn't having the day that I had hoped to have. And I'm along on the marathon with this other competitor, and he is just completely negative about the day, how crappy it's going. And I'm like, dude, we're out here in Hawaii doing a triathlon. People would love to be here. So it's all about your perspective. And I try to find, and I think it's important to find a positive side to that. Again, I started this in the 80s, and I'm still going, and I hope to continue. So thinking about the long term, I think is crucial rather than getting it done by the end of the year. So think long term rather than just jump into the next lily pad to get that done. So I have talked about a lot of different things. I love talking about this. I have, from my racing to my time in the lab, have done a lot, thought about a lot. I like to talk about this a lot. So I would certainly be interested in any questions that anybody might have, anything that I've said that might have prompted your interest, and to see what questions somebody might have.
Thanks, Scott, for your awesome insights and your vast experience as an endurance athlete as well as a coach. I think it's a perfect blend for us to ask you some interesting questions. And we've got some questions here that I've just noted it down. So the first question is, what is your mantra to stay injury-free when training for such long endurance events? How have you handled this as an athlete and later on as a coach?
I think I tried to allude to that, but my mantra is be smart, listen to your body. I'm constantly telling myself that. I am constantly doing body checks. How do I feel? And do I feel like I'm on the verge of hurting myself or having injury? And so my mantras are, I can do this, be smart. What's my body saying?
Oh,
And
wow.
for a marathon, for a triathlon, or even for long term, I think that mantra at least has served me well.
Awesome. I think mindfulness, I think, is something that you're talking about, and I think it's very important for us when we want to stay injury free here.
Yes.
We've got Rama Bangad from New Jersey, who's eager to meet you in US. Her question is how to pace properly in her 10-mile race. She takes 50 minutes for her first 5 miles and 60 minutes for the next 5 miles. Any suggestions on how to maintain her pace throughout her 10-mile race?
So a 10-mile race is, to me, a 10-mile race and a half marathon are perfect, the perfect race distance, really. And so I like to get to the starting line having broken a sweat. I like to be sweating when the gun goes off. So consequently, I am trying to get into my goal race pace very quickly. I am hoping that by mile 1, I am at goal race pace. And so I'm not thinking I'm going to ease into this. Marathon, yes. 10 miles, you're racing for an hour, you're racing for an hour and a half. I would think your goal would be to try to, and again, if you've done the training, you should know what that goal race pace is and what that pace feels like. Try to get into that by that first mile so that you've now got 9 miles to stay focused and plenty of time to catch that competitor, hopefully, that started out too fast. It's going to fade.
Awesome. So we've got one more question here from Arun. How important is warm up and cool down for recovery during training? And what are your quick tips on them?
No, warm up is crucial. You don't want to go from one extreme to the other, being rested and seated at work to running hard. So I definitely take 10 minutes every day to transition. I look at it as a transition to warm my body up to that quality effort that I hope to put into that training session. Likewise, the cool down is terribly important so that we allow our hearts to drop. I know you had Dr. Contractor a couple weeks ago do a presentation and talked about heart health. And his presentation was really good, that you often see those irregular heartbeats after exercise. And so that's why that cool down is terribly important to help minimize that risk of those arrhythmias.
Yes, I think that's a perfect answer. I think, there's one more very interesting question that I've got from Sachin Krishna here. She's saying that since amateur athletes in India do not have access to labs for VO2 max testing, but some of the smart watches like Garmin, they display the VO2 max for running and cycling. What relevance these numbers are in relation to your lab test? Are they similar, or you think it's something?
No, that's a great question. I'm glad you asked. So most people know that max heart rate, you can be estimated by 220 minus your age. Well, that has a standard deviation of 11 beats. So these smart devices that we wear on our watch that will sometimes tell us our VO2 max, those are estimates. You put in your profile, it gets your heart rate through your training session. Those are estimates. They're pretty good estimates, but they are not specific. And so if you really want to base your training off of your physiology, getting tested would be a little bit more precise. Again, those estimates are pretty good, but if you want to be a little bit more precise and you have the luxury and opportunity to get tested, I would go for that.
Awesome. So we've got Rakesh here who's asking, how does a marathoner decide if his endurance is good for multi-sport? Any checkpoints, any progression plan?
So I think a marathon, certainly if you're running a marathon, you've got the aerobic endurance to transition to multi-sport. I think it's a function of what you have done as part of your exercise routine to do the swimming and to do the cycling, to be able to shift your training so that you can jump on a bike or you can get in the pool. It's really interesting when we take runners who are really fit runners and we put them in the pool and ask them to swim for 10 minutes. I mean, while they're amazingly aerobically fit, they might not have the skill to do that. And so I actually have a lot of runners get in the pool and kick, and they can't even do that because their ankles are so tight. So just because you're aerobically fit and can do a long distance run doesn't mean you're going to be successful at a triathlon. So I would encourage all runners to get in a pool and do nothing but some kicking if they have that opportunity, just to help with range of motion of their ankle.
Okay. We've got one more very interesting question from Vishy here. What's your preferred way to train? A rate of perceived exertion, or heart rate based, or power meter? And what's your take on these metrics?
Well, I think these metrics can be very valuable. I think too many athletes focus too much on these metrics. For cycling, without a doubt, I think a power meter is a very invaluable tool. I've had a power meter on my bike for over 20 years. That's a great device. I don't always use it to completely dictate what I do, but it's very helpful feedback. Likewise with heart rate. There are so many factors that affect heart rate that I'm not sure I would base all of my training on heart rate alone. I tend to like RPE, that rate of perceived exertion. How does your body feel? I just said I've run my last 4 marathons without a watch. So ultimately it's your body. And then my last comment on that one is, I just would hate for an athlete, triathlete or runner, to get dependent on that technology. What would you do if you're halfway into your event and the battery died on your device? Now what are you going to do? So ultimately it's your body. You've got to know your body. So use those metrics to help, use those metrics to analyze your training. Not sure I would depend on them completely as the driving force on race day.
Awesome. So we've got Mangesh, who's a triathlete here, and he wants to know, is the VO2 max values different for different disciplines like swimming, cycling, running? So could it be possible that he could be having a higher VO2 max for running and a lower VO2 max for cycling?
Oh, absolutely. And that's probably the case with all athletes, all triathletes. You could bring a Ironman champion triathlete in here and you could test them VO2 max treadmill, VO2 max bike. You can even do it swimming, and those are going to be completely different values.
Why is that so?
Well, the biggest factor is muscle mass activation. Mm-hmm. So if you're running, you are activating a much larger muscle mass than if you're sitting on a bike. If you're sitting on a bike, you're not holding up your body weight. You're only using your lower extremities. And so, big difference between the three, and primarily because of muscle activation. In fact, when we test runners, we actually like to test them at an elevation on a treadmill because they are working a bigger muscle mass. So we can put the screws to you by making you run faster. We can put the screws to you by making you run uphill. And by actually the elevation, we get a higher value typically because larger muscle mass activation.
Okay, so we've got one more question from Abhijit. How many months should we take to jump from half iron distance to full Ironman distance? And what should be one's approach in this regard?
So that's a great question. And the answer is is a tough one, right? I tend to say with Ironman stuff, it's the training that you're doing 6 months out that is crucial. Now, if you got a family, that's hard. But if you want to do an Ironman event, it's that base training that you are doing 6 months out, which I think ultimately is going to be establishing the base on which you sharpen those last 16 weeks. So to stay focused for 6 months is hard. But these days, because these races fill up so quick, people are registering a year in advance. But you can't focus on something for an entire year. But I think 6 months is plausible.
Okay, good. So Milind Rai, he has a question saying, how much weekly and monthly mileage would you suggest in base period zone preparing up to a marathon when in today's time, there's no foreseeable marathon event?
Yeah, that's tough. And of course, to answer that in time gets a little interesting. You know, and I'm running 35 miles a week. And a lot of people say that's not enough mileage for a marathon. But I'm doing the other activities. And so I am generally doing an hour of exercise a day. And then on the weekends, I'll try to get in a long run, maybe 2 hours, and I'll try to get in a long bike ride, maybe 3.5, maybe 4 hours. So, you know, and again, we're all juggling a lot of stuff. So I'm getting in about 10 hours of exercise a week. Now, before I had kids, I was doing a lot more. But right now, I think 10 hours a week is a reasonable balance to be able to get a good level of fitness to do some of these, to be very competitive in a marathon, to answer the question.
I think we'll take a couple of more questions. There's Suresh Zimba who's asking, what's the composition of nutrition for aerobic training that endurance runners should take?
Nutrition is not one you can answer in 30 seconds. If you're going to do high quality, intense workouts, it has got to be carbohydrate based. Now, there's a lot of refined carbohydrates out there that certainly are not recommended, but eating a whole food, plant-based, carbohydrate-based diet is the way to go if you want to do high quality, intense workouts and for your racing. So I am generally getting in 55%, 60% of my calories coming from complex carbs. And then after that, I'm getting, 20% of my calories come from protein and the remaining 20% coming from fat.
Awesome.
That's a quick and easy answer to a very complex question.
Yeah. So I think we've got some good triathlete questions here right now. There's one triathlete here who wants to know, what do you recommend? Do you recommend brick workouts in your triathlon training, and why would you recommend brick workouts?
Oh, as I mentioned earlier, I look at a triathlon as 5 events, and so most triathletes think of a brick as a bike run workout. I would actually encourage you to do workouts where you do a swim bike workout. I mean, you're in a horizontal position and now you're in an upright position. You've got to practice that. Likewise, going from bike to run. One of my favorite workouts is bike 5 miles, run 1 mile, do that 5 times. I get in 25 miles of cycling, 5 miles of running, and I am practicing going from seated to supporting my body weight to changing shoes. And so I think you've got to practice your body changing that physiology as well as you just changing shoes. So yeah, without a doubt, I think those brick workouts, I like to call them transition workouts, are crucial to being a successful competitive triathlete.
Okay, so we've got one last question that we'll take here, and I want to take this question because it's slightly different. So we've got Suresh is asking us, how reliable is Gatorade's GX sweat patch over standard sweat rate test? Do you recommend athletes to do a sweat rate test before their races?
We are all out running in different temperatures. I would think that the best thing to do, and again, I've already said we're all different, would be to weigh yourself before you go out for your workout, weigh yourself after your workout. How much weight did you lose? The weight I lost this morning will be very different than the weight I'll lose in a month from now when the temperature is much higher. So knowing the temperature, knowing the duration of your workout, I think can be a very valuable, insightful way to get a sense of your sweat rate under different conditions. The one that the question asked about, it gets a little complex because that company is also selling a hydration product. And so I think they've done some great research. I think they offer some great products, but I personally am just always a little suspicious of people who are providing testing equipment when they are also selling something. And so I just think we need to be a little mindful of that as we interpret that data.
Thanks, Scott, for answering your queries. I would like to hand over the presentation to Sudhakar for a vote of thanks.
Thank you, Sunil, for the Q&A facilitation. Who better to lead today's Q&A than you as our own Ironman from Hyderabad Runners? Thank you. Friends, it was yet another informative and inspiring 1 hour. We hope you enjoyed attending the event as much as we do in organizing it. A few key insights from Dr. Murr's talk. Number 1, focus on the training and not the technology. We can be competitive with the basic equipment. Number 2, training with a purpose is crucial. Have an effective training plan. Number 3, work on improving form and posture. And finally, favor quality over quantity. Thank you, Dr. Murr, for these valuable inputs. Our deepest gratitude for taking the time out and sharing your experiences and learnings with us today. And to our audience, thank you for choosing to spend time with us today. Please feel free to ask any more questions you have for Dr. Murr in the comment section. We will work it out to get you the answers. The recording of this event will be available on our Hyderabad Runners Facebook as well as the Airtel Hyderabad Marathon YouTube page. Please come back to watch again and share it on your social media profiles and to others who can benefit. Before we wind up, we would request all members to follow the government advisories to be safe and healthy, considering that the number of cases are increasing rapidly. We'll be back next Saturday with yet another expert and yet another interesting topic for you. Just as you mark Sunday mornings 5 a.m. to 8 a.m. for our SLR, the Sunday long run, week after week, you can now mark your Saturday evenings, 7:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. for Beyond the Track webinars. We hope to see you every Saturday. Until then, this is Sudhakar from Hyderabad Runners signing off. Stay home, stay safe, and stay healthy. Bye.